Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for Raising Eagles, brought to you, of course, by Community Services. We understand that this is a very busy time of year, so we appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to join us for this really important session. I'm Ashley Croston. I'm the Director of Community Services, and with us on this call, we have Christy Alexander, and she is our Family and Community Engagement Liaison. Say that 10 times. Just kidding. Rebecca Wigington is our Director of Counseling, and we actually partnered together really well to figure out what sessions we're going to offer throughout the school year. We also take input from you guys, as well as our principals and teachers and the school community. We have some upcoming Raising Eagle sessions. January, kind of going along with the theme of getting back into the routine of healthy habits and fitness and sleep, nutrition, all the things. We have Mackenzie Harris coming to us. She is a nutritionist, and she is really, really great at working with kids and teens. And so she is going to be a wonderful presenter. In January, we have two different sessions that she's going to present on. One will be for K through 6, and then the other one will be for 7 through 12, as those presentations will look a little bit different to make sure that we hit what you guys need for each age group. And then don't forget, we do have our Raising Eagles liftoff tasks located on our Raising Eagles website. And this is an opportunity for families to take what you've learned and really apply it, try it out, share with us what you've done. And then at the end of this school year, we will have an end of year celebration for all of our families who have completed 4 or more of these liftoff tasks, where we'll come together and we'll just celebrate the partnership that you guys have created with us and us with you. And we'll have some games and ice cream and fun opportunities for your kids and families to be able to engage in. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions about any of that. I'd be happy to help and assist. And now we are going to hear from Dr. Ryan Smith. He has been with us many times before. He is awesome, and he is going to keep your attention for the next 40 plus minutes about building empathy and self-esteem to combat social anxiety. This is a really, really big one right now. The social anxiety piece, I think it's definitely grown since technology has come into play, and we've become very comfortable at looking at our phones instead of talking with people in real time. So Dr. Ryan Smith, take it away.
Thanks, Ashley. Welcome, parents. I appreciate you being here. As Ashley just mentioned, I'm going to talk for a second while I'm sharing my screen. As Ashley just mentioned, the prevalence of social anxiety struggles and issues has skyrocketed in the digital age. And it's not really hard especially for those of us who grew up in a digital world. It's not super complicated to see the connection between these two things. My hope today is to help you understand what it is we're talking about, where it came from. But then, as always, if those of you who have been with me before will know, I always end you with like practical, go home and do this level stuff. To me, that is the most important part of these presentations. Generally speaking, and it's a rule that I developed a long time ago, generally speaking, if you're attending one of these, you kind of already know it's a problem, so you don't need me to convince you that it's a problem. That said, I do want to start with a definition of what we're talking about, because I think the phrase anxiety, if there is any one word that the modern culture that we live in has kind of I don't know what the right word to use is. It's polluted a bit. The word would be anxiety. I think we've applied anxiety to all uncomfortable feelings, and that's really not what anxiety is. Okay, anxiety does have a definition. Now, before I get into my slide, I need to first tell you something about my slide. So for the next couple of slides, I did something, I kind of made a conscious choice that I don't typically make. I'm going to give you very text-heavy slides. Okay, so there's a lot of words on the slides. If you were with me in person, I would literally do the opposite because I want you to hear my voice, not be reading a slide. The reason I'm doing it this way is because since we started doing these Zoom presentations, what I'm noticing is the more information I can put on the slide, the better, because you can screenshot and you can reference it later. Okay, so here's what I'm going to beg you to do. You don't have to read the slide word for word. If you find one interesting, screenshot it, hear what I'm saying, you can go back and look at it. All right. Disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about what social anxiety is. Social anxiety, as we're going to define it, is a persistent fear of social situations where a child worries about being judged, embarrassed, or rejected. Okay, it's a persistent fear. It is not going into a new place and feeling a little uncomfortable because we're in a new place. Okay, again, there is a definition of this, and it has an important bearing on how we understand social anxiety to exist. So, a persistent fear of your child being placed in situations where they'll be judged, where they'll be rejected, or even where they won't fit in. But it's a sense prior to being introduced into a social setting. It's a sense where your kid feels a persistent level of discomfort. Okay, how do we differentiate that between normal social stress, because that's a normal thing as well? To me, the differentiator is the word persistent. Okay, so it shows up in your kid all the time, even when they're going to social situations where they will know the people, social situations they've been in before. If you see that pattern emerging, you may be dealing with something a little more than just I'm going into a new place and I'm a little uncomfortable. So that's how we're going to define social anxiety. And I wanted to point to two different places where that social anxiety tends to come. Okay, the first one is one that won't shock you. It is the fear of being evaluated negatively. So if your child worries that they're going to be made to feel isolated in some way, that could create a sense of social anxiety. I'll give you an example of this, and I tend to use my own kids as examples because I don't want to use anybody else's children as an example of diagnosable stuff. I have a pretty highly anxious 10-year-old. A little girl in his class called him weird at one point, and she called him weird because he was a homeschool kid for a long time. He gets really excited when he gets to answer questions, and so he wants to answer questions. He is the kid who shoots his hand up when the teacher asks a question, and she called him weird as a result of that. He came home and asked me, he said, "Dad, do other kids think I'm weird because I like to answer questions?" Okay, so that thought process of like, do other kids think I'm weird or they think I'm annoying? That's kind of the foundational stuff we're talking about. So that can be a root cause of social anxiety. That we can talk. We're going to talk a little bit about reality, because there are times where that fear comes from their own internal thinking. There's times it comes from experience. So my son has that as a root issue right now, not because he thinks it might be true, but because a girl literally said that to him. So we have to have a conversation about the fact that yeah, this did happen. Now, our pathway for that was a little different. Our pathway was to acknowledge that it is different that he answers questions. And it wasn't about trying to convince him that wasn't different. It was about helping him understand that his difference, his weirdness, so to speak, was a gift, and it was awesome. And if we help him understand that if he were to be rid of the weirdness, it would be to get rid of some of his best qualities. So that's a side conversation, but that's the first root. The second root is the one that I think we're going to spend most of our time on. And that is the underdeveloped empathy and self-esteem systems. Okay, so if your child has an underdeveloped empathy and self-esteem system, it is entirely possible that social anxiety will be the end result. Now, if that is true for your kid, it may be no fault of your own. It may be no fault of your parenting or of their environmental factors. Your kids, by virtue of just biology, don't yet have the internal scaffolding that helps them feel secure in social interactions. Okay. The other thing that will cause anxiety as it's related to this underdeveloped internal scaffolding is if you have a kid with a high level of emotional intelligence. So a kid who understands his or her own feelings and emotions. That's not most kids. That's not most elementary kids. But if you have a kid with a heightened sense of emotional awareness, then it's possible that kid is going to struggle with some social anxiety. All right, I wanted to show you some data. I'm not going to read all these, but I wanted you to see that this is a real problem. Okay, I'll give you kind of a flyby. Um, Approximately 11% of kids have a diagnosed anxiety disorder. I wanted that number on the screen for a reason. 11% is probably less than most of you thought it was going to be. I think you probably would have assumed it's half of them at this point. It's really not. Close to half of them that will self-report with symptoms of anxiety disorders, but I don't think it actually crosses the threshold of diagnosable anxiety disorders. That's true in about 11%, but that's still millions of kids. I wanted you to see that globally, it's about 4.5%. So our culture is one of the most anxiety-ridden cultures globally, and the irony in that should not be lost on us because we are one of the most comfortable cultures globally as well. There is a phenomenal book. It's for adults. It's not one that I would recommend necessarily reading for your kids. But there's a phenomenal book by a guy named Michael Easter called The Comfort Crisis. His entire thesis is that we are struggling with depression and anxiety symptomology in our culture largely because we're so comfortable. The brain seeks homeostasis. And so when we introduce struggle, the brain seeks compensatory relief. If you're kind of a holistic, I want to feel better without narcotics and without antidepressants, one of the first things you'll probably run into is the concept of ice baths. And there is some really hard science behind ice baths being really effective for both anxiety and depression because it shocks the system into a state of panic. And then your brain releases serotonin as almost like a medicinal effect for 3 to 4 hours afterwards. Okay. So in other words, I wanted you to see that the comfort that our kids live in, the fact that they're very rarely threatened, which is a good thing. I don't want to go backwards, but that reality does create some fairly persistent anxiety in kids, despite the fact that the dangers are lower for our kids than in lots of other cultures. You can see the data on the screen. The main thing that I wanted you to hear is actually in the fourth bullet point, which is that self-esteem, which is what we want to try to create in kids, is formed primarily through experiences of both capability and of belonging, not of praise. Okay, parents, I want you to hear me and hear me well. You praise your children a lot, and it's good that you do that. Don't ever misunderstand what I'm about to say. I think you should continue to praise your kids. I love the fact that we are more open with praise than prior generations of parents. I think that is a phenomenal gift that we have as parents. However, we've got to learn to praise our kids the right way. Okay, what we tend to do is we only praise outcomes. We praise them for the numerical grade on the test. We praise them for the number of points they scored in the game. We praise them for the amount of productivity that they produced within the time frame that we wanted them to produce. Whatever. We praise the outcome. That's not a bad thing, but it is incomplete and will largely just create kids that are reliant on praise. It doesn't actually raise their self-esteem. I promise you, before this time is done, I'm going to tell you how to praise your kids in a way that will be far more effective. All right, so let's get into some root causes. Where did this come from? Social anxiety didn't just come out of nowhere. It came, I'm going to identify 6. There's a lot more, but I'm giving you 6 that I personally believe are the 6 most prominent. One is just sheer developmental wiring. Guys, your kids are kids. They lack their prefrontal cortex capabilities. I'm going to give you an example of this that you will no doubt relate to. My 14-year-old, he just turned 14 on last week. He had a camp out with his friends. That was his birthday party. I don't know if you remember the weather. It was cold and wet, and he had a camp out, no problem. They're 14-year-old boys. They had a good time. My 14-year-old, we live on a farm. He has been raised on a farm. He knows how to exist on a farm. He knows how to build campfires. He knows how to be safe around campfires, all the things. We have done all the things. It did not prevent my 14-year-old from having the thought, I'm at a campfire with 8 of my buddies. I wonder what'll happen if I throw this AA battery in the campfire. Now, that is shockingly dangerous. shockingly dangerous, and he absolutely knows better. But his prefrontal cortex brakes could not effectively pause the train of the AA batteries. Now, parents, how did we manage that? I'm giving you we want to make logical consequences. It was his birthday. I didn't necessarily want it to ruin the day. But as all parents came to collect their children, I did make my 14-year-old go out and apologize to the parents for putting their kids in harm's way. Now, nothing happened. Everything was fine. But I did make him stand in front of parents and say, I threw a battery in the campfire. I thought it would be funny. It exploded. Nothing happened, but I'm sorry that I wasn't thinking. So that developmental wiring was very real. I know he knows better. There wasn't a need for me to do a lot more than that, but I had to acknowledge that developmental wiring is a struggle for him. For your elementary age kids, the prefrontal cortex that is going to help them understand their place in the world and help them reduce their naturally high levels of anxiety, it's just not fully developed. So I want to give your kids a lot of grace for the fact that it's going to happen. My 14-year-old absolutely knew better. It was a stupid thing to do, but he's a good kid. He's an otherwise very good and responsible kid. He needed to be taught responsibility. He didn't need to be just mercilessly punished. He needed to own what he did. All right. So let's talk about comparison culture, because that's the second reason that your kids are struggling. I'm going to sound like an old man for a second. But I grew up in a world where I had to compare myself only to the kids around me. It is the reason that I was very confused around my junior year of high school. I was very confused as to why Division I basketball programs weren't banging down my door. I didn't understand that. I just thought they must not know where to find me. You know what did it? I went to a camp one summer that was like a college basketball recruit camp, and I got to see what a D1 athlete looks like. And you know what it was? Not me. I learned really quickly, these guys are all bigger than me. They're all faster than me. They're all better than me. Now, why did I not know that? I didn't know that because I was at a 2A school in Alabama. I had no idea that they had bigger kids at other places and that those kids were going to dominate me when we got on the floor together. Okay, that's the world that I grew up in. Your kids, generally speaking, don't get those experiences. What do I mean? I mean that your kids aren't comparing themselves to 20 classmates. They're comparing themselves to kids they see online. They watch TikTok videos of athletes that are their age doing pretty amazing things. I have watched my own children in their various hobbies. I've watched them seek out videos of kids doing their hobbies, and the kids are doing stuff that my kids can't do. Your kids are having the same experience. So whereas a previous generation may have had a sense of feeling like I'm really gifted at this one thing because I stand out amongst my group of 20 kids, your kids have a little bit of that, but they also have a global comparison that most generations can't relate to. There's also been a massive decline in unstructured play. That was actually one of the reasons that my kid and his friends were camping. I wanted them to have a 24-hour window where there weren't adults involved. I didn't even know about the battery until the next day. They were able to play. I heard them. I checked on them. I looked out in the backwoods every now and then and saw headlamps playing around in the woods. But unstructured play is one of the best things your kids can get, and they don't get a ton of it. The reason for that, something happened in that moment, in that campfire moment. My kid's smartest friend told him not to do it. My kid, Sawyer, his name is Sawyer Panther. He is one of my favorite kids in the world, but he was there with him. And Sawyer told my son, hey, you don't put that battery in, that's dangerous. And my son was like, yeah, but I kind of want to see what it's going to look like. That unstructured play allowed for some negotiation. I was able to talk to both of them afterwards. And I thanked Sawyer and I thanked his parents. That interaction, though, that back and forth of seeing that a friend offered you input, you didn't take it, and there was a negative result of that, those were growing opportunities. Unstructured play creates the opportunity for your kid to have to work through a hierarchy. It creates the opportunity for your kid to not get along with kids and still work through it. Unstructured play has been taken away from a lot of our kids. So if you get nothing else from our time together, your kid is not getting enough unstructured play. Now, if you've got an elementary age kid, I wouldn't encourage you to turn them loose in the woods the way I did with my 14-year-old. But in so much as you can provide it, putting your kid in the room with trusted peers, putting your kid in the room with friends or with family, with people that you feel pretty confident with, and then kind of letting them navigate play, coach them, give them instruction. Don't just turn them loose with no direction at all, but help them with the framework, with the scaffolding, and then let them work through some of the negotiation they have to work through. Also, parents, I'm gonna touch on some personal stuff here for just a second. We're not helping. Lawnmower parenting is an epidemic, and it's one that I really struggle with, and I want to tell you what I mean. Helicopter parenting is the phrase most of us are familiar with. Helicopter parenting it's parents who hover above their kids, monitoring what they do, and then intervening when necessary. There's actually a fair amount of data that helicopter parenting is not necessarily a bad thing. When we kind of hover above our kids' lives, it's not the worst thing in the world. Lawnmower parenting is new. Lawnmower parenting is the parents serve as a lawnmower, which removes all of the obstacles and weeds from our kids' path so our kid can walk a clean path. That I really struggle with. When your child struggles in school, I want them to talk to you, but I want you to help them talk to their teachers. Okay, that's like a helicopter approach, which is I'm involved. I know what's happening with my kid, but I'm coaching my kid to talk to his teachers. For my own children, that's one of the things we always encourage them to do. When you're struggling in school or when you're struggling with a peer, the kid who called my 10-year-old weird, we did a couple of things with him. One of the things we did was encourage him to talk to his teacher, which he did, and she was amazing. So I want you as parents to help coach your kid to resolve their own struggles. Now, we got involved to a degree. I did communicate with the teacher and I said, hey, here's what he came home and said. I want to make sure that what he heard was accurate. And we had a good conversation. But as he gets older, when my 14-year-old has a problem with a teacher, the first thing I ask him is, have you talked to them? And if the answer is no, my first response is typically, okay, you need to reach out to them and then we'll talk. So I want us as parents to be able to put our kids in a situation to solve their own problems. Parents, if you are the ones going to the teachers first, that could be a problem. Now, if your kid's being bullied, if there's a reason you're really worried about their safety, I don't believe that to your kid. Go ahead and get involved. Do what you need to do as parents. But for grade issues, for something happened in class issues, attendance issues, he's going to be late tomorrow, stuff like that. If there's ever an opportunity, parents, to have your kid resolve their own problems, you're going to really help with social anxiety. And the reason for that is because your kid is going to learn in each of those interactions, I can talk to people when I'm struggling. Another root cause is just a lower emotional vocabulary. Folks, your kid can't manage what they can't name. There's a phrase, I don't think I included it in a slide because I'm just now thinking about it, but there's a phrase that I want to put in your mind. It comes from a guy named Daniel Siegel. The phrase, and it's out of the book, The Whole Brain Child. The phrase is name it to tame it. If your kid can name the emotion, the big emotion that they're experiencing, it activates the prefrontal cortex in a way that helps mitigate some of their emotional reactivity. Okay, the non-clinical way to say that is if a kid who's angry can say out loud, I'm angry, science would indicate that will begin the process of reducing feelings of anger. All right, so teach your kids an emotional vocabulary. Help them understand words other than frustrated and angry. They've got access to those. Help your kid understand the word despondent. What does that mean? Despondent is the word when I'm so emotionally overwhelmed that I don't want to speak. That's what despondent means. Help your kid understand the word irritated. Irritated is somewhere between okay and angry. Irritated kind of exists on that spectrum where I'm kind of moving in that direction. If your kid can identify irritated, maybe we can head off angry. Okay, so we have to learn like multiple levels of anger vocabulary, of negative affect vocabulary. So parents, one of the best activities I encourage you to do with your kids is learn emotional words, a wide spectrum of emotional words. Your kids will start using them in ways that you'll find funny. My 10-year-old told me a year ago, he said, I just don't like it when you wake me up abruptly. It starts me off irritated. And it made me laugh because it was the most high maintenance thing he's ever said to me, but he was 100% right. Also, and this is one that I talk about a lot, so I won't expound on this, fewer face-to-face interactions, meaning your kids, unfortunately, are getting fewer face-to-face interactions than any previous generation. The concept of DoorDash is great. The functional impact of it is not great. What do I mean? I mean that the ability to go onto my phone, order my food, have somebody else place the order, have somebody else pick up the order and interact with the person at the restaurant, to then have somebody else bring it to my house, leave it on the doorstep. Typically, they're not even handing it to me personally. I don't love that. You can get food without ever talking to a person, and I don't love that. So in so much as you can, give your kids the chance to talk to every adult you're interacting with in public. Cashiers, waiters and waitresses, ticket takers, employees in various capacities, even people cleaning up restaurants and stuff. Have your kids interact with people in a public setting. All right, so there's two things that are going to buffer social anxiety. One is empathy. Okay, empathy doesn't just help your kid learn how to be nice. Empathy actually helps them feel safer socially. And the reason for that is because empathy builds all of these really cool things in your kid. Empathy is the ability to understand somebody else's experience to the best of your ability. To be fair, I don't know how realistic empathy really is. I don't know how much I can understand Ashley or Christy's experience. They can explain it to me. They can talk to me about their kids. I can talk to them about mine. I know what it's like to be me raising my kids. I don't know what it's like to be them raising theirs. Okay, so I don't know how much I can fully understand another person's experience, but I can do everything possible to try. And in that process, what it allows me to do is it allows me to see the world through their eyes, and it allows me to see problems through their eyes. It also allows me to connect to them as friends and as peers. And I want to tell you why that's really important. Parents, if you have a kid who is struggling with social anxiety, the number one predictor is loneliness. In other words, if your kid is socially isolated, that social isolation may have been what led to the social anxiety, not the other way around. Okay, I'm going to say that again because I think it's really important. You probably think, if you have a kid who's socially anxious, you probably think that the anxiety has led to your kid being socially isolated. It's entirely possible that the isolation is what led to your kid being anxious. Okay, so in other words, the more we can put our kids with peers, the more we can build social scaffolding, the more connections that your kid can create, the more likely it is that they won't struggle with social anxiety. In addition, empathy also builds social predictability. If I can, to a fair degree of accuracy, if I can predict how Ashley and Christy are going to respond to a certain event, it helps me build empathy and it helps me prepare for a similar event. Okay, I also want to talk a little bit about self-esteem. Self-esteem, man, we could do an entire presentation on just self-esteem as a concept. It's kind of where we are today, but we could talk about it as just a concept. Self-esteem is competence. Okay, if you want to learn what is self-esteem, what is really self-esteem? Self-esteem is competence. It's not compliments. True self-esteem comes from three places. It comes from mastery, which is, I know I can do hard things. It comes from autonomy, which is the idea that my choices matter. I have some control over the world around me. And it also comes from belonging, which is I am valued for who I am, not just what I produce. Parents, If your kid has these three characteristics in their life on a regular basis, the odds that they will be self-confident human beings go way, way, way up. Okay, now we're not necessarily controlling for trauma. We're not necessarily controlling for some other things. But if your kid has a record of mastery, now I don't mean mastery in like the universal sense. What do I mean? I don't mean that your kid who knows how to play like Mary Had a Little Lamb and Chopsticks, he may not win a piano competition. But if your kid set out to learn those songs and learned them, that's mastery. It means I can learn how to do something that's difficult. I can learn how to do something that's hard. If you want to build competence in your kid, musical instruments are one of the absolute best ways to do it. Put your kid in front of a piano. There's an app I love with kids, and they're building family apps off of it. But there's an app, it's kind of expensive, but it's called Simply Piano. I have seen a number of kids learn how to play the piano using that app. It's basically the gamification of music theory, and it uses an iPad placed on a piano. But that mastery of taking something difficult, learning how to do it, and then showing it off to parents begins this process of self-esteem. Autonomy. Autonomy is the idea that I have some control over my life. So parents, as often as possible, give your kid controlled choices. You've probably heard of the idea of limited choices, and I really believe in it for competence. Give your kid the choice of three options that you have curated, and you're giving your kid autonomy. Okay, so you've got a shower, you've got to eat, and you've got to have 20 minutes of quiet time of doing something. Which of those do you want to do first? That's autonomy. And now the options are limited. I didn't say, what do you want to do for the next 20 minutes? I gave you some limited options, but those options create autonomy because your kid does get a sense of, hey, my choices do matter. I get to pick what comes first. And then again, we're going to talk about the last one here in a minute when we get to praise. Okay, so when these three things go up, social anxiety falls. So we've kind of covered the preliminary stuff. In our last 20 minutes, I'm going to give you some strategies. Okay, how can we do these? Okay, I'm concrete, hands-on, nothing is going to be abstract here. Number one, I want to encourage you to bring in a 5-minute emotion coach check-in routine with your kids. Let me show you what it looks like. Daily check-ins that will train expression in your kids. These are simple. These are short. Parents, this does not have to be some drawn out thing. If you turn this into some kind of ritualistic thing, you're going to end up failing on it because you won't think to do it every day. This can be something as simple as your drive on the way home from school or your first 5 minutes when they get home. Here's what it looks like. Tell me one thing today that hurt, helped, and humbled. Those are 3 H's. Something that hurt you, something that helped you, and something that humbled you. I don't want to emphasize any of those, but I want to just give you a chance to talk about all of them. There's other ways you can do this. There's strengths, there's struggles, and there's regrets. There's a lot of variation in how you do this, but I want you to talk to your kid about a range of emotion. Do you know one of the things that we do, I think, too often? We only ask positively slanted questions of our kids. Tell me something good about school today. And we do that for a good reason. We want them to think positively about school. And I love that. Definitely do that. But also let's open the door for, did anything hurt today? Was anything hard today? Okay, we give our kids the chance to kind of work through the breadth of their experience. Now, I know that it's going to sound, maybe a little counterintuitive from a therapist, but I actually don't want to dwell too deeply on the negatives if that's possible. If they're there, man, work through them. But I don't want your kid to get into a place where they believe that, okay, this is my chance to suck my parents into this deep emotion by always hunting for negative things. If your kid says, nothing, I can't think of anything that hurt today, awesome. They don't have to find one. You can say, okay, great. Maybe there'll be one tomorrow. Okay, you don't have to They don't have to give you an answer to each one of those. All right, so those check-in routines, I know they seem simple and I know they seem small, but parents, they are magical in terms of stretching your kids' emotional elasticity. All right, let me give you a couple more. These are all kind of in the same universe here on these first couple. The brave but not perfect check-in looks like this. Tell me one brave thing you did today. I love this prompt with my own boys. And the reason for that is because I want them to start looking for ways in which they can be brave. Okay, now what does that look like for your kid? Your kid is going to have a spectrum of social experiences. Okay, I haven't looked at the count and I can't find my mouse at the moment. So I don't know how many parents we have on this call, but I'm betting okay, there we go. I got 41 people on this call. So I'm betting I have a spectrum. Let me talk about, I'm going to have some of you on this end. On this end of the spectrum, here's what I've got. I've got some kids who struggle to get out the door. They struggle with interacting with every person in school. They struggle to talk to the adults. They struggle to talk to the peers. They struggle with getting the information and processing it because they're thinking about what's going on around them. And then I've got over on this other end of the spectrum, I've got the kid who bounces out the door with absolutely not a care in the world, forgets all their stuff because they just can't wait to get there and talk to the people, can't wait to see their friends, says hi to teachers that aren't theirs, talks to the administrators. So we've got this huge spectrum of social connectedness. Wherever your kid falls on that spectrum, you can define what bravery looks like and encourage your kid to do it. Okay, so let's talk about the ones on this end. For those kids who struggle to say hi to anybody, one really brave thing they may do that day is say hi to a kid they've never said hi to before. That may be their one brave thing. And man, if they do that, you celebrate it to the moon. You talk about how proud you are of them. What a brave accomplishment. Good for you. And maybe the next day we're going to build off of it. So what's another brave thing for tomorrow? Tomorrow it can be say hi, and then maybe ask if that person wants to play in the game that you were playing. Maybe ask if that person wants to color with you based on what age they are. Ask if that person wants to sit with you. You can build on these braveries. Okay, for the kid on the other end of the spectrum who talks to everybody, what's one brave thing you did that day? Well, my kid talks to everybody. My kid doesn't struggle with bravery. You know what a really brave thing for that kid to do would be to seek out that kid who is struggling to connect and to invite them to play in the game that they're playing. To see that somebody said something mean to a peer and you said, hey, I don't want to talk to people that way, so let's not do that. That would be a brave thing for your kid. But I want to instill bravery. I got 41 parents on this call. I'm betting all of you want brave kids. Folks, that's how you get it. You have to instill a brave lens for them to view the world. How about the 3-minute mirror? This is about relational self-esteem. This is parents reflecting back 3 truths that your child showed you that day. Now we're getting into the how do we compliment our kids. Okay, I want to start looking at their effort. And I want to start observing the parts of their character that are revealed in their activity, not just the final product. Okay, I'll give you an example of what that looks like. So you see on the screen 3 examples. I'm going to give you one that I think will take it a little bit deeper, but I wanted to give you some easily accessible ones. So I noticed that you stuck with that puzzle. Maybe they didn't complete it. If your kid completes a 300-piece puzzle, which go with Ravensburger. Those are the best puzzles. Ravensburger puzzles are the ones that their licensing deals generally have like The Incredibles and all the stuff that your kids will be familiar with. So if your kid does a 300-piece puzzle, which is about right for an elementary age kid, maybe if they're not used to it, maybe start with 75 or 100. But if they do 300 pieces, I don't want you to praise how beautiful the puzzle is. Okay, your kid didn't create the puzzle. The beauty in the puzzle was by the manufacturer. What I want you to praise is that your kid worked through a puzzle and solved problems in a complex way. For the record, puzzles are the greatest cognitive stimulator that I am aware of. I would encourage you to facilitate doing puzzles with your kids as often as possible, and that might include parents, you picking up a new hobby. They're weirdly therapeutic. But I'm going to give you another one. Let's pretend your kid loves music. Okay, you have a kid who creates music. When your kid brings you a song that he or she has created, I don't want you to just praise how great the song is. I want you to praise the process it took to create the song. Your kid had to imagine something, had to dream something up, had to learn the program. Maybe they're using GarageBand. They had to learn the program. They had to actually sit and work through the layering of each one of those instruments. That's incredible, regardless of what the final product is. Praise the process. If your kid is into writing, you know what's probably true? Your kid's probably not writing C.S. Lewis at this age of their life. Your kid is probably not writing, why am I blanking on J.K. Rowling? Your kid's probably not writing the Harry Potter series. Is probably not writing the Percy Jackson series. But if they took the time to write something, praise the initiative that it took to write it. That's what I want your kids to hear. Not just that they produced something good, but that they worked through the process of creation. I have got 41 parents on this call, which means some of you have kids in youth sports. I coach. I played basketball my entire life. I played every sport imaginable, but basketball is the one I concentrated on. It's the one I made fun of myself earlier. I thought I was fantastic until I actually saw what good players look like, and then I learned, no, I'm actually really good for a school that only has 64 kids in my grade. But I learned that wasn't the case. With my own kids, they play basketball. Both of my children play basketball. Neither of them is exceptionally gifted. Neither of them is exceptionally good at it, but they both play, and we try to praise the effort that they put in to work for rebounds. We try to praise the effort they put in to play defense. We try to praise that kind of stuff. When they score, it's great, but I try my best not to overemphasize the points, because not every kid is going to score a lot of points. Okay. And even your kid, if your kid believes that scoring points is the only way for them to get praise on a basketball court, you're going to end up with a kid who is a very selfish basketball player. And I don't want that. Okay. So whether it's football and it's points, it's touchdowns, whether it's basketball and it's points on the board, whether it's baseball and it's home runs, whatever the sport your kid plays is, instill value in the activity and in the effort, not just in the outcome. Now, your kid scores a goal in soccer, you are welcome to lose your mind. Go nuts. Praise them like crazy. Talk about how great it was. But make sure you're complimenting the process and how we got to the product, not just the product. It's one of the reasons why, and I get this question when I'm doing sports stuff, which I weirdly do. When people talk to me about paying for goals, I don't like that. I'm fine incentivizing your kids, but I would prefer you incentivize something other than just the outcome. If you praise your kid, if you give your kid dollars for every A they get, be cautious, because if the A is all that matters, the easiest way to get there is to cheat. The quickest way to get there is to cheat. If the A is all that matters, ChatGPT will do this assignment way better than I will. If the praise is for the effort they put in, they can't cheat on that. So if you're gonna incentivize your kids, you want to incentivize your kids' grades, incentivize the amount of time they spend studying. If you want to pay your kids for grades, which I don't love theoretically, but every parent's different. If it works for your family, I'm not going to knock it. But I would love to, if you're going to pay them for the time they spend studying, not for the end result. Pay them for and when I say pay, I'm using that term flexibly. I'm not advocating for paying your kids for these things, but I'm trying to deal in the real world. These are the kinds of things I know that parents do. So if you're going to praise your kid for the amount of time they put into the work, not just for the final product. All right, here's one that I really, really, really like. And I'm going to give you the teenage version of this too, because as your kid gets older, it'll be helpful. The empathy workout. The empathy workout is once a week, take a conflict or a situation and have your kid take the other side. I was a history teacher. It did not matter what subject we were discussing. It didn't matter what era of history we were discussing. When I taught, I told my kids, whatever argument you give me, I'm taking the counterpoint. And the reason for that is because it builds cognitive empathy, conflict flexibility, and reduces black and white thinking. It helps you understand people better. Now, what I would do is I would take the counterpoint and then I would ask them to switch. When I did debate with my kids, they don't get to pick which side of an argument they want to pursue. They have to be given that task. And the reason is I want to force you to think outside of what you naturally believe. All right. So if you want to operationalize this in your home, if you have siblings who are in conflict with each other, maybe a good exercise to resolve the conflict would be to ask each of them to argue the other one's perspective. Now, folks, you're going to have to do some coaching if you've never done this before. If this is new for your kids, you're going to have to help them understand your kid has a perspective. When I'm doing marriage counseling with people, one of the most effective things that I do is in the middle of like angry conflict, I'll ask them to switch roles and to defend the other person's position, defend the other partner's role. And what's interesting is they'll do it through gritted teeth sometimes. It doesn't necessarily automatically make them happy. But by switching roles, it does build empathy. It does build flexibility. And you begin to see something. What you begin to see, and this is what I need your kids to hear, most of the time when there's conflict between two people, it's because of a misunderstanding. It's not generally because of like a malicious desire to hurt somebody. But oftentimes they don't know that unless they've been forced by a loving, compassionate adult who has their best interest in mind. They've been forced to think about a problem from the other person's perspective. All right, I'm going to give you one more. If you got a kid who is really struggling to go to a birthday party, a kid who's really struggling to go to school, a kid who's really struggling to go to whatever social thing that they're struggling to go to, here are some things that you can do. Before you walk into that social setting, preview, practice, and plan a connection. So these are your 3 Ps for social interaction. Ready? Talk to me about what may happen at this event. What is it you're worried about? I love for kids to unpack that because most of the time that's where this ends. Because as they unpack it, you'll begin to see, oh, well, their fear is not necessarily rooted in anything that's ever happened. It's rooted in like a conjecture, and it gives you the ability to talk to them. But talk to me. What might happen? Okay, if it does happen, how might you handle it? So that's first 2. Preview and practice. What might happen, and then how might you handle it? If your child is worried, and I'm trying to come up with a good elementary school one off the top of my head. If your child is worried because at recess, we get free play time and everybody goes off with their own peers, and I'm new at this school. And so when I'm in 3rd grade, and when we go out to play, everybody goes with their groups of friends, and I don't really know who to go with. And I get uncomfortable because everybody seems like they have friends, but not me. Okay, that preview, that's what your kid might be worried about. Okay, practice. Let's pretend for a minute that recess has just started. What can you do? Well, I could go to this group of friends. I had lunch with this kid. Maybe I could go see what he's doing. Maybe it's about what they're doing. These kids are playing sports. Do I like to play sports? If so, I'll go with them. Okay, these kids are playing a game. Do I like games? Maybe I'll go with them. These kids are on the playground set and they're climbing on stuff. Do I like doing that? Maybe I'll go with them. Regardless of what the answer is, giving your kid a chance to practice what to do in those situations gives them a sense of confidence. And then lastly, and the most important of all 3 things on that slide, is plan one connection. Parents, does your child struggle with social anxiety? If you do nothing else, ask your kid who is one person you can talk to when you're in that situation. Is it a peer you've talked to once or twice before? If your kid has nobody and can't think of anybody off the top of their head, maybe you're going to a place they've never been. Maybe they say, I don't know. I don't know who's going to be there. This is new. It's a new place with new people. Okay, here's your challenge. Your challenge is to introduce yourself to one person and ask if they want to play. That's one connection. We want to help your kid plan for one strong connection. And I gave that example. When we get there, pick one person to ask a question about their day. All right. I'm going to close you with a lightning round. You ready? Here's a couple other things that will help you prevent your kid from struggling with social anxiety. One, reduce evaluative talk as much as possible, which is they're little. I'm not as worried about whether they did it right. I'm worried about whether they were thinking when they did it. I'm worried about whether they were putting forth effort. Parents, I know that you don't like this sometimes because of all the things I say. This is near the top of the list and what I get pushback on. I've got to give my kids grace for being kids. Okay, I need to praise their effort, knowing that they will refine it going forward. Some of you heard that my only real intervention when my kid threw a battery in a campfire was to have him apologize to the adults. Some of you think I went too easy on him. I get that. You think I should have taken away his life. Guys, he's 14. I know my son. He's a good kid. He genuinely felt bad. He was super embarrassed to have to apologize to parents. But I needed him to beat that story home. And I needed him to feel a tangible result. I promise you this. He remembers apologizing to those parents more than he would have remembered me taking away a bunch of his stuff. So now, if it proves that wasn't enough, if he continues impulsive behavior, now for the record, he doesn't have a history of impulsive behavior. If it continues, then maybe we'll have to reconsider. But for now, I want to focus on the fact that he's 14 and makes dumb decisions. Your kids do as well. So focus on effort more than evaluation. Next, increase your descriptive talk. Praise the process. Love your process. Don't always love the product, but I love your process. Add 20 minutes a day of unstructured play. Man, that's tough. I don't know that I could find 20 minutes in my day, but it's still really important that my kids get unstructured playtime where I kind of stay out of their way. And in those 20 minutes, I really prefer they not be on devices. That's not unstructured play. The console, the game console, or the iPad or the phone is the structure. So that's not unstructured play. Unstructured play is literally play without a device in front of them. Model self-compassion and healthy struggle out loud. Parents, how many of you struggle with social anxiety? If the statistics are true of the 41 parents that I saw a moment ago, if the statistics are true, at least 15 of you probably struggle yourself with social anxiety. If you do, it's okay to tell your kid that. Don't lean into it. But let your kids see you struggle with this and let your kids see you work through it. Maybe it's the thing that actually moves both of you through it. Limit digital comparison windows, especially before school. It's not a tech presentation, but I can't leave you about social anxiety without saying, if your preteen has social media, your preteen will struggle with anxiety. I don't know how else to say that. Your preteen does not need social media and should not have it. If your preteen has access to social media, your preteen will struggle with anxiety. And that means TikTok. I'm not going to ask for a digital show of hands. But parents, if you hand your kid TikTok as entertainment, your elementary age kid, TikTok for entertainment, please stop doing that. It's not helping. It hurts in a lot of ways. Short form video is devastating for your kid's ability to pay attention. And it's devastating for your kids' confidence based on what they're looking at. So the best solution to short form video is to not expose your kid to it. If you've been in any of our other presentations, you kept hearing me say over and over and over again, give your kid story-driven content, which actually leads me to my almost last bullet point. Read deep fiction. I had a conversation with the parent of a first grader last week, and I asked about fiction. Are you reading fiction? And the answer I got was yes. And when I asked what the fiction was, the answer was the Hank the Cowdog books. That's great. If that's what your kid can handle, that's what you can handle, that's awesome. but I'm going to challenge you the same way I challenge that parent. Your kid can handle a whole lot more than that. Your kid can handle chapter fiction. You can be reading novels to your kid by first grade. Maybe you don't have time to do like these deep novels, but if you can pace it out 3 times a week, doesn't have to be every night. 3 times a week, one time, Saturday nights, Friday nights, Sunday afternoons. If you can find a little bit of time in your week to read through a novel with your kids, I promise they can follow way more than you think they can follow. And it is like a magic formula for your kids' empathy. When your kids, so I won't do the science behind it right now, but when your kid reads fiction, what am I telling you to do to reduce social anxiety? I'm telling you to build empathy. The thing that builds empathy faster and better than every other approach is reading fiction. Directors of library services and librarians love me when we talk about empathy because reading fiction is the way to do it. You know what's funny? I still text with my oldest son, who's 14, his kindergarten teacher, and I still text with my wife because she is still the greatest resource in the world for fiction for kids. Okay, she moved. They live in Abilene now, but we still text because she helps us pick fiction for our kids. Read fiction with your kids, give fiction to your kids, and then praise liberally, but do it correctly. Compliment and observe their behaviors together. Okay, compliment and observation together. So let me tell you what that looks like. I am so proud of this grade. That's a great start. Most parents will stop right there. You made a 90. I'm so proud of you. Great job. We're going to pin this one up on the fridge. Where do you want to go to dinner? And that's the end of the praise. Okay. Again, it's not bad, man. I love you for that. If you're complimenting your kid, awesome. But let me give you the maybe deeper version of that. Wow, you got a 90 on that assignment. That is amazing. You know why? That was hard content. And I watched you come home and study. I also know they don't just hand out 90s. So I love the fact that you knew the content well enough to get yourself to a 90. That tells me you've paid attention in class. Tells me you wrote this down. Maybe you studied for this thing. That is incredibly, you know what's crazy? You did all that stuff and you ended up with a 90. Good for you. Notice what I just did. At the end of it, ended up praising the process and just observing the grade. I'm not even praising the grade. I'm starting with that. But what I'm doing is talking about what that grade means. Okay. So, man, you scored 20 points in a basketball game. That's awesome. You know why? Because the only way to score 20 points is to work at it. It's to know that you have to find openings in certain places. You have to be picky and choosy where your shots are. That's great. That's awesome. So I'm really proud that all of that hard work resulted in 20 points. Now, do you know why I want to do that? Do you know the easiest way to get 20 points in a basketball game? Shoot every time you touch it. Okay, if I shoot 70 times, I'm going to get you 20 points. And if you only look at the box score and say, hey, he scored 20, he had a great game. No, my teammates don't want to play with me. My coach is furious with me, and I did everything wrong on the basketball court, but I scored 20. Let me tell you how that praise looks. If my kid comes home with 20 points in the game because he shot 50 times, you know what I get to do? I get to say, okay, bud, 20 points. That's great, but getting there by shooting 50 times seems like you were shooting 4 or 5 times more than the rest of your team. Your coach seemed to be unhappy about that. Your teammates seem to be unhappy about that. Let's kind of talk about what that looks like. Okay. Praise your kids liberally, but folks, please move beyond just praising the outcome. All right. So here's your parting thought. And then I'm going to hang around and do a couple of questions. Social anxiety isn't a flaw. It's a signal. If your kid is struggling with anxiety, your kid's not broken. Your kid needs empathy. Your kid needs competence-based self-esteem. If you just tell your kid they're awesome, that's not enough. Tell your kid they're awesome, but don't just tell your kid they're awesome. Tell them why you think they're awesome. That gives them a roadway to compliments. And then predictable emotional support means let me give you an example. I praised my kid's effort and energy in his work with basketball, my 14-year-old. I praised it relentlessly, and he still had a really embarrassing game. And when he had an embarrassing game, he was not very good. He had some embarrassing moments in the game. On the way home, he was upset, and I had a chance to talk him through. Sometimes you work really hard and it doesn't work out, and that's really hard. It doesn't mean we quit working, but man, I get it. It's hard. That's kind of what sports and life is. It's putting yourself in a position to be hurt. Parents, nothing good in life comes without the risk of something bad. No relationship is meaningful without the possibility it could go away. There is no such thing as a risk-free good thing. Help your kid understand that. And then when it's bad, when it goes poorly, parents, you may do all of this stuff with your kid. Hey, go talk to this kid. And your kid may walk up and say, do you want to play with me? And the other kid may look and say, no, you're weird. That's going to be hard because you as a parent are going to think, oh, we did all this work and then it blew up in her face. I get it. When that happens, you tell your kid how hard it is. You recognize how hard it is. You encourage your kid to talk to her teacher while also maybe doing the same. And maybe as adults, you can work through this. But provide emotional support where it's necessary. Praise competence. Teach your kid empathy. Parents, you do those things. I promise you are in a position to do all three of them. And if you do, I give you my word, you may not fully eliminate social anxiety. It may be there under the surface, but your kid will be able to navigate it like an absolute boss. And that's what we're hoping for. All right. So I am going to stop sharing my screen and then stop sharing my screen. Let's take a look in the chat. If you have questions. Okay. We had a play date and outdoor. There were 3 girls. There was only a boy. Then the one girl said to my son, he was ugly. I'm with you. That happens to a lot of kids. I'm going to cry. How can I help him? He felt he was left out because they were all girls. Okay, let me pause on that first situation. Man, that is difficult. Kids insulting each other is really, really, really unfortunate. I wish it didn't happen. I wish that I could protect your kid from it. I wish I could protect my kid from it. Let me tell you what we did in that situation. And it was a little different because there wasn't a gender isolation with my kid. But I told you already, my kid was called weird, which is kind of like being called ugly. We talked to the teacher. We involved the adult who had the ability to intervene. The adult helped. She was great. She did intervene. For you, maybe it means talking to another parent. Maybe it means now I would always encourage, you got to continue your kid's version of that story is only your kid's version of that story, unless you saw it, in which case that's even better. But I'm not saying it didn't happen that way, but remember the girl will have a version as well. So be humble when you're talking to those parents. And when you're talking to them, say, hey, here's what happened. I'm really hopeful we can come to a resolution on this. If this is a public playground situation, you don't know these kids, you don't know these kids' parents, sometimes it's okay to tell your kid, yeah, there are people who will say and do things that we wish they wouldn't do. And part of the way we can manage it is we don't choose to spend time with them. Situation number 2, before situation, same girl said my son was showing middle finger. When I heard, I was shocked. Exactly, what should I do? I told him he shouldn't be doing this. And he started, hold on. I started blaming them. And it was first, okay, what am I doing wrong? All right. Krista, first of all, what am I doing wrong? I'm with you. Not necessarily anything. You don't have to assume that this is a parenting problem. I don't know what happened. I don't know whether your son was holding up this finger. I don't know whether your son wasn't. I don't know. I wasn't there. You weren't there either. I'm always reluctant to discipline a kid for something I don't know, for something I can't confirm. I will always talk to a kid about it. So if it's one kid's word against another, in that situation, I'm going to isolate. I don't need to do a whole investigative thing. A lot of parents think that's what they're supposed to do. Let me interview everybody who was there and see what really happened and what didn't happen. I'm less worried about that than I am with, okay, let's pause for a minute. Do you understand that that's unacceptable? If you do understand, tell me why it's unacceptable. Okay, so you do understand that it's unacceptable. You understand why it's unacceptable. Now, let me talk to you about what might happen if I were to find out that you were doing this. And then you can have a conversation about what intervention might look like. I'm less worried about whether or not it objectively did or didn't happen than I am with your kid understanding that it is not acceptable. That gives your kid the ability to, Okay, I can internalize this and learn the lesson without necessarily having to pay for something he may or may not have done. But it also leaves open the possibility that he did do it. Let's move on to the next couple. We're new in town and got a competition. We got a competition who talks with more people and make more new friends, and he won. Oh, Jessica, that makes me happy. We had a competition of who talks to more people and who makes more new friends, and he won. What a great way for new kids and a new family to kind of ingratiate themselves. What was the name of the piano app you mentioned earlier? Simply Piano. They do not know me. I get no sort of endorsement deal with them. Although if you happen to work for Simply Piano and want to pay me for that, I'm going to take it. But Simply Piano is great. It really is it's a gamification. Like, it uses technology. It's a good use of technology. I'm not anti-tech, but use it the right way. Simply Piano is good use of that. They have Simply Guitar as well. My youngest tried to do it, but his fingers were too small. So if you've got elementary kids, it might be too small. Simply Piano is not just for iPad, can get it on Android. Boom. Awesome. Okay, what's the best way to help my son's dad understand the need to model the same predictable, healthy emotional support as I do? Oh, man, I know multiple techniques are probably great for a lot of things when it comes to emotional support. We're definitely on different pages. So there's not enough information in that question to be able to fully answer it. And I think there's not enough because there doesn't need to be. There doesn't need any more than what's there. So don't put any more in the chat. Here's what I got. I'm going to interpret that question. Me and Dad are on separate pages. He is a little more callous than I am. He thinks that he needs to get tougher, and I think that he needs to be more emotionally aware. Maybe I'm overstating. Maybe that's wrong. But okay, so there we are. So it's hard to give you a pathway without knowing Dad. But one thing I will tell you is, if you want any hope of bringing Dad into this conversation, Dad needs to feel like his approach there's room for it. You know what? In his defense, modern kids probably do need to toughen up a little bit. Okay, I maybe I sound like an old-fashioned dad when I say that, but not everything is trauma. Not every person being mean to you is the worst moment in the world. Not being a starter does not mean you're not valuable. Not getting straight A's does not mean you're not a good student. So yeah, to an extent, maybe he's not wrong, and maybe starting there with, there's some ways in which he's probably right. But what I would hope is that from there, we can then move into ways in which you're not wrong either, which is that kids do need to be more emotionally aware. My kids need to know that it's not the end of the world if somebody calls them a name. But they also need to know that it hurts when somebody does, and that they shouldn't do it to people, and that other kids need to be told not to do it either. All of that can be true at the same time. There doesn't have to be, there's not a binary choice. It's not a life's tough, buy a helmet. That's one approach. Another approach is everything is awful and I have to lawnmower my kid to death. There's room for these two things to coexist and to meet somewhere in the middle. So Mom, whoever you are, try to meet him where he is first, with the hope being that he'll meet you where you are. And if that's not possible, my best advice is to tell you that kids always do better when the parents are close to the same page as they can be. And if you can't get each other there, being willing to talk to somebody who does what I do, with the goal being that we are going to talk to someone who's not going to try to help us get along or help us be closer or whatever, but is going to help us craft a message that honors these two perspectives. Life's hard, buy a helmet, and I want you to be emotionally aware. Go to somebody with those two. If it's us together, if it's the three of us, I can listen to him and listen to you and figure out how we can craft this into a unified vision. Now, whether he'll be on board with that or not is a separate conversation, but that's the best I can give you. All right, guys, I got a jet, so Ashley, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay, well, thank you guys so much for joining us. We hope that you have a great rest of your afternoon, and hopefully we'll see you in January for our upcoming sessions.